Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have an awesome Tuesday show for you today. Briahna Joy Gray is back in the hosting chair. Good to see you there because they made me sit in that chair yesterday.
Oh, did they really?
And looking at that screen and reading what's on it from that seat, I don't know how you do it.
Robby,
it is tough.
We've got to get your good side favorite here. I can't believe they would do that to you.
Devastating as always.
Well, on the docket today, investigative journalist Adi Adz joins later to discuss the fallout from riots in Brazil that saw Jair Bolsonaro supporters storm the country's capital. Plus, we'll dive into reports that the Department of Justice is reviewing classified documents that were found in President Biden's private office from when he was vice president. But first, today is House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's second day on the big job. And according to new reporting from Axios, he's got big tech on the mind.
As promised to members of the House Freedom Caucus during last week's negotiations, McCarthy will form the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, a partial response to the Twitter files. Axios reports that the subcommittee's top goal is to probe the, quote, politicization of the FBI, including the Bureau's investigations of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Meanwhile, in their first act as the new majority, House Republicans passed legislation yesterday retracting the $80 billion that Democrats allocated to fund the hiring of new IRS agents last year. The bill, however, is not expected to pass the Senate.
As far as the rest of the Republicans' agenda goes, the Telegraph reports that as part of negotiations to secure his spot as Speaker, McCarthy indeed promised to cut U.S. aid to Ukraine. However, to get it done, it looks like the Speaker may have to take on some members of his own party. Here's Republican Representative Michael Waltz on the topic yesterday.
Congressman, should military spending cuts be on the table and put on the table by a Republican?
Well, look, I agree with Jim Jordan that we are going to carve out woke policies out of the military. We are going to look at the out-of-whack ratio of generals. I invite him to come on the Armed Services Committee and work with us on that. But Stu, and by the way, I'm all for a balanced budget. We've got to get spending under control, but we are not going to do it on the backs of our troops and our military, when at the same time we're talking about China is the greatest threat. We're going to have a select committee on China. They're tripling their nuclear arsenal. Iran is racing towards a nuke. North Korea is about to launch an ICBM. Russia is on the march. And oh, by the way, we still have a global terrorist state now in Afghanistan, thanks to Joe Biden. So this is, I mean, we can work on prioritizing defense spending, but that's really nibbling around the margins. Okay. If we really want to talk about the debt and spending, it's the entitlements program. That's 70% of our entire budget. That $1.7 trillion and defense within that is only 30%. So if we want to talk about big reforms, I look forward to hearing that from those folks who are pushing towards a balanced budget.
This is why spending never gets cut.
What won't the word woke accomplish, Robby? You know,
woke is doing a lot of...
We're going to cut the woke parts out of the military. We're going to cut the woke parts. I don't know how many
trillions that's going to save us.
We're going to cut woke parts out of your health care, your Social Security and Medicare next. Are we going to cut the woke roads, go into woke towns so we don't have to pay for infrastructure? I mean, what's next?
Look, and what they're complaining about when they complain about wokeness, some of that I think has some legitimacy and maybe should be gotten rid of, but it will probably not save a lot of money. The defense budget is massive. It's somewhere between 10 and 10+% of the budget. Is it going to defense? Is going to regime change in all sorts of countries actually defending the United States, or is it making the world less safe and us consequently? So this is the problem with Republicans. They're not serious when they talk about cutting spending, but then they have their golden calves that they will not slaughter, to mix some
right, because it's not about a balanced budget. It's not actually about the idea. It's about they're happy to spend money, but they want to spend money on their priorities and the ones that enrich the people that fill their pockets. This is what corporatists do. This is what elites do. The military is the largest socialized industry or operation in the United States of America. Basically, we're running social programs through the military saying the only way that you can get a reasonable living wage in this country, the only way you can get your college education paid for, the only way you can get health care is to sign up and go do regime change wars all across the country. So they're not against socialization. What they're against is any kind of socialization that actually trickles down to poor people who aren't being tasked with picking up guns and killing people in other parts of the world who never did anything wrong to them. So you have them openly complaining right now now about how difficult it is to recruit people to actually join the armed services. At the same time, you have the head of the Defense Department, who is a former Raytheon employee, Lloyd Austin. The revolving door is as open as something could possibly be. The corruption is as open as it could possibly be. And you have no criticism of that from a prong of the party that I think a lot of people hope will do a real substantive critique of military spending here and regime change reports.
Especially because many Republican voters, many conservatives, want a change in foreign policy.
Yes.
They're all for it.
A substantive one, based on principle, not on this trying to shoehorn woke critiques into a critique of the military-industrial politics. I agree with you. There are some narrow areas where I would agree that there have been overreaches. It's how I started my entire career, critiquing the analysis of identity politics, critiquing the analysis of cultural appropriation, and the ways in which I think the left had jumped the shark. But this is not it.
Yeah, I would. There are now plenty of social programs I would cut as well. I would look at what we're spending on education, to take one thing. Billions and billions spent on education over the last few decades. Education gets more expensive. The quality doesn't get any better. The outcomes don't get any better. I don't think anyone can argue, even if you think we should spend a lot of money on education. It's not, what we're doing is not working, or it's not making any difference. It's not making things any better. So I would like to look at federal spending domestically as well.
I have no problem with reforming all kinds of things, but the trick that so many conservatives do is to say there's a problem that is legitimate, and then say the answer to this problem is just to take money out and not do anything to try to help the people that are suffering.
But Democrats do the opposite. They say the answer is to put more money in it. More money always gets put into it, and the problem doesn't go away.
That's fine. I'm not a Democrat. But the problem is here, like, let's take the IRS example. I understand there are people on the left and the right who are critical of the idea of giving more funding to an institution that historically very much has targeted poor working people. I think the most audited place in America is like in Mississippi or some place in the Deep South that is very, very poor, while rich people get away scot-free. Now, I understand thinking, well, why would you want to further enrich an agency that does this? However, it is also true historically that at a time, this is the funding that the Democrats passed last year is to restore the IRS to the funding levels that it had about 10 years ago, I believe. And at that time, it did actually prosecute many more white-collar crimes. And part of the argument that is being made is that they don't have the resources to prosecute higher level fraud because it's more complicated. You know, it's easy to go after someone who just misfiled their taxes, who has a small business, et cetera, or to go after these Venmo transactions and things that they've argued they should start doing, than someone who has 1 million lawyers working for them to hide the extent that they've stolen from the government. I also agree, however, that simply giving more money to the IRS doesn't necessarily guarantee there's going to be the renewed focus on the wealthier people that we did have last time there was more funding to the IRS, but those correlation isn't necessarily causation. So I would argue that what you should be wanting now is for the IRS to have funding, but only if there's also protections that ensure that the direction, the focus of the institution is in fact going to be on elites and not doubling down on the persecution of poor people.
Well, let's make the tax code simpler so that people pay what they're supposed to pay and they know what it is. The government knows what it is. Maybe the government could tell you what you owe.
Send you a bill.
Instead of you trying to figure it out. And
100%.
We do this game where the government's like, okay, we know what you owe, and you put it together. Is it that? Nope, you're under arrest.
100%.
So stupid.
It's like a trap. It's bait and a trap.
And it's especially complicated for people who have multiple sources of income, who have side jobs, who have.
It's the gig economy.
It's complicated for us, for people with freelance income and different. I'm not saying we're not.
This is going to be my first year
people,
kind of having that scenario because I just started at Rising last year, and my call-in show just started last year. So this is going to be my first year of having to deal with that. But I completely agree. The reason that the process is so complicated is precisely because all of these tax companies lobby the government with millions of dollars every year to make sure that the people have to use TurboTax or whatever.
The complications benefit those companies, and they benefit the wealthy and the elites.
Yes.
Because the more complicated it is, the more ways they can get through those loopholes.
100%. So if conservatives could take a hint from this agreement that we're having here, there is a problem that we agree on. There are solutions that would really meet the moment, and they aren't all of this partisan, we got to just do blanket government defunding. I think that might be necessary. If you simplify the tax code, I don't think the IRS is going to need as much money, absolutely for sure, but you can't just do the defunding without addressing these root problems.
Absolutely. All right, well, I will tell you what's on my radar. That's coming up next. Stay tuned.